Alright, hello everyone. My name is Shon. I'm going to be um, putting this on my Shon chess account. My name is Shon. I am a competitive chess player, 22 years old, living in the Greater Toronto area, and I'm here recording chess videos with a focus on documenting my chess journey. What I'll be doing is trying to record with a physical chessboard and analyzing my games here, and also just talking in general about like my journey through chess and what I'm thinking, any advice from you guys, and just being able to better use this as an opportunity to reflect on how I play the game and analyze, but also for um, for it to be documented online. And I want this to make it sort of a journey where other people um, can be a part of it as well, and maybe be inspired to take on their own chess journey too. So yeah, I'm here just mainly going to be analyzing my classical chess games, looking at instructional chess stuff, material, and discussing that with the purpose of becoming a better classical chess player. My ultimate goal is ultimately to become a national master in Canada, and so the way to do that is to get a tournament norm of 2,300 or more in 3 tournaments. And what a norm means is that you have a performance rating of 2,300 or more. A performance rating just basically is reflected based on how strong your opponents are and how well you do against them. For example, if you have, and these tournaments, by the way, have to have at a minimum 5 rounds in a classical time format. If, for example, you play 5 rounds against 1,200 players in every 5 rounds, well, if you're a 2,000 rated player, a 1,900 rated player, that's not that impressive because there's a very huge rating gap, and you're not going to be awarded a lot of points, and it's not a very high tournament performance. However, if you have a 5 out of 5 record against 5 2100s, that will get you a 2,300 tournament norm because that is a very difficult feat to achieve, to not only be able to beat a 2,100 in a classical format, but to beat 5 2,100s in a row in a classical tournament. What with all the stamina and being able to be able to be consistent and be dominant over your opponents. And on top of that, so you need that. You need to have that to happen 3 times, but you also need to get a classical CFC rating of 2,200. It's not just that you get the tournament performances, but the 2,200 rating further reinforces the fact and proves that you're actually qualified to receive this title because you're able to get your rating to that level, regardless of whether you get lucky at 3 tournaments or not. And so that's my goal, and ultimately that's what I'm trying to do here. And so with this game that I'm presenting, it's a game from today actually, at the time of recording, Monday, July 21st, 2025, where I played a weekly drop-in classical CFC rated game with a 60 plus 0 time control, and I played with the white pieces. My opponent was with the black pieces. My CFC rating is around 1850, and my opponent is around 1834, so a little bit lower than me. And with this game, I didn't really think too much about what kind of opening to play. I just kind of went into what my preparation, my mainline theory, and that's usually the Catalan. And so I played the move d4, and my opponent responded with the move d5. So that already is an indication that they're going to play some type of maybe Queen's Gambit decline, Slav defense, or really those two, because when you play d5, it kind of already tells your opponent how you're going to be responding and how you approach the game, right? If you're someone who plays d5, you like to be a little bit more direct, establish a little bit of control in the center as black, because with d5 you do have control over the center. Obviously, white has the initiative with being up a tempo, up a move, but it's not as hyper modern with moves like, instead of d5, knight to f6, where you do some type of King's Indian attack, or Grunfeld, where you attack the center from afar with your pieces. So my opponent plays d5. I go into what I know, which is c4, Queen's Gambit decline. really not a lot of other options to fight for an advantage. The London system can be equalized very easily within 15 moves with just like natural play, nothing too complicated, but I won't get into that. So this is the only way to fight. My opponent responds with Queen's Gambit declined. I play Knight of 3. My opponent plays Knight of 6, and I play G3, getting into the Catalan. So my opponent actually lets me get into what I'm comfortable with in my main line and what I go for, particularly in my d4 games. And my opponent plays Bishop to e7, Bishop to g2, Castles kingside for my opponent, and Castle kingside for myself. This here is the Catalan setup. And here black has two options. What black can do is opt for one of two types of defenses against the Catalan. They can go for the open Catalan, which is d takes c4 here. Pawn will take c4, which does open up the diagonal, but there's ways in which that black can navigate their pieces on the queen side, particularly, developing in a way to avoid the pressure and maybe even protect the captured pawn with moves like b5 in the right circumstance. But what white here has is usually moves like knight to e5, queen to c2 to prepare to recapture the pawn, and there's usually open lines for white to play, even if they don't successfully recapture the pawn, which does happen half the time. Another variation is to go for the closed Catalan, which is to not capture it right away, instead playing c6. And this opts for a more passive, but more of a building up your position and then breaking out with a pawn break. Here, the open is just more direct, where it forces the issue at hand, but c6 is more of a slow build-up. You'll expect knight d7 here, and then b6, bishop b7 here, and then c5 setup with the pawn break of c5. I just gave it black a few moves, but it's just to kind of demonstrate the kind of position that arises out of both variations. But what my opponent does, my opponent just takes the pawn, heading into the open variation, and now I have three options as white. I can go for the knight e5 line, knight to e5, which not only makes knight ready to recapture, but opens up the bishop for a line of pressure. And there's nothing wrong with this variation. In fact, this is fine for white. But the problem is that even though it looks like you cannot play knight to c6, there's actually a line where black nearly equalizes, and it's a forced variation after knight to c6. And I'm not going to show you the entire variation, but basically it's a way for a few pieces to get traded, including the light square bishop, actually, which even when you trade your light square bishop, it's kind of like the whole focal point of your opening. If you don't have light square bishop, then you don't have really, a long-term strategy for pressure and having an advantage. So this is why I refuse to play knight a5 in the opening. You have queen c2, but again, I didn't like the fact that there's a6, which actually is a move here to prepare b5 after recapturing, and then there's bishop b7, knight d7, and c5. And again, this allows the development for the black pieces to be relatively comfortable compared to like other openings where black has difficult time developing like their light square bishop, right? Usually like it gets blocked by the c pawn, but when you have a6 b5, you're able to get it out relatively easily. So I reject both of these two, and I go for the move knight to a3. What knight to a3 does is get ready to recapture the pawn, but instead of going to d2. Instead of going to d2, because b5 is still possible here with knight to d2. So I can't actually recapture the pawn, and even after knight e5, there's knight to d5. Yes, this is a possible variation, but my project of trying to recapture the pawn is not there, and now my knight on d2 is blocking my queen and my bishop. So I want to go for this route, where b5 is not possible. Sorry, the knight is on f3, because I can just simply capture it, and this is not an option for black. The best move here for black is for the bishop to take the knight, forcing my pawns to double, and giving up the bishop pair, which is not something black wants to do here, especially because they've already moved the bishop once. And it seems counterintuitive, but this is the best way to go because there's a solid way of development with bishop d7, c6, and knight d7, and there's no structural issues for black. And they're able to be solid, but they're not going to be very active because they're just choosing for a solid play, while white has the two bishops and the open files once the pawn recaptures. You see that the b file is open, and once the c pawn is captured, the c file will be open as well. So, therefore, my opponent plays what seems like a natural move, a6, to prepare a future b pawn advance and get the bishop to b7. But the problem with that is that when I recapture, which I did, b5 does come, and it does hit my knight, but I have a move here that completely allows me to be able to delay moving the knight, which is the move knight f to e5. And this move here opens up the bishop to attacking the rook for my opponent, and my opponent has to respond to this. They cannot capture my knight because then they'll lose the rook. I'll be up in exchange, and the structure for black will have doubled pawns here, and the pawn here will be backwards and isolated. So my opponent responds with the only move. If you want to pause it, it's just a one move puzzle, but there's really only one move to defend against this. It is knight to d5, which stops the bishop from being able to attack and renews the threat of the capture. The only other move would be rook to c6, but that actually puts the rook on an inactive square, open to future sack by the bishop, and knight e5 comes to threaten a fork on c6, and bishop cannot be developed. So this would be bad. So knight e5 only move. Now I do have to respond to the threat because they defended against my threat, and I play knight to a5. Now at first glance you might think, knights on the rim are dim. That's a common saying in chess because knights are typically not very active on the rim. But here in this situation, my knight is on a sort of outpost on a5 because no pawn can attack it. There is no possible pawn b6 move because it advanced to b5, and it's not that easy for it to be attacked because any c pawn move, I can actually come to c6 and fork and capture this bishop here, and I'll be able to get the bishop pair with no cost to my pawn structure. Remember when the knight was on a3 here, the bishop capturing here offers black the ability to damage my pawn structure, but with being able to come to c6, and there would be a trade in here, I'm able to have the bishop pair lining down on the queen side for black with no cost to my pawn structure. So knight to a5, and this is really difficult for black to move anything because anywhere any piece moves, I'm able to continue my advance. If, for example, bishop can't come here because of the capture, and knight can't come here because of a fork here, and again, the pawn c6 just loses the pawn. What really, I think, like the only move that you can really play here to just make any progress, which my pawn did, is bishop to f6, which puts the bishop on a better square. Potentially queen e7, rook d8, but not just quite yet. But maybe queen e7 and then supporting a c5 pawn push. And then maybe rook a7 and then rook c7. And then being able to support knight d7 because now there's no fork. That would be some kind of ideas planned with the maneuver bishop to f6. But now what I have is the opportunity to take space in the center, which usually happens after knight to d5. But I first had to respond to the threat here, which is e4. Now I have two pawns in the center with no real cost to my structure or being down material, because in other Catalan positions, usually e4 comes after there's a capture on c4 and black tries to defend it, which they're able to successfully do, but white has compensation with activity in the center. Here I'm not down a pawn, so I'm able to get activity in the center at no cost, and I have a stronger advantage I have a stronger position here than I would if there was a pawn on c4 and I wasn't able to capture it. It would make it a little bit more difficult for me, but it's not. And after e4, black has to react. Knight to b4. Now here, I felt this was a critical position because this knight on b4 is a bit precarious, and that for me, to me, it feels like there's some way to punish that knight because there's nowhere it can retreat to. If you try and move, even if you give black an extra move, this knight can't go anywhere. a2, c2, d3, c6, it's going to be captured many times. So I thought this was maybe a move that I could punish. But there's no clear way. Because if I simply play a3, there's the move bishop takes f6. And I have to respond to this capture, otherwise my d pawn will be taken, like this. And then a move like knight to d3 is available because the queen protects. And there's a threat of the capture here, and also a capture of the pawn. And I lose an active piece of mine on top of that, like in a trade. And then this pawn I can never advance and allow my bishop to unleash. Yes, white does have a space advantage, and white is still more preferable here than black. But getting rid of my active piece and blunting my bishop is definitely a strategic win for black. So I felt that, and even there's the retreat to c4 if pawn is protected, bishop f4, or even like this rotation. So I felt that a3 was not able to attack properly. So instead what I went for is bishop to d2, attacking the knight this way. And this can lead to a complicated variation complicated variations after the move queen takes d4, because I am in fact hanging my pawn in the effort to attack my knight, and attack black's knight. But what I felt I had here, and before I say what variation I was thinking of that black could do, here's something that white could not do in response to queen takes d4, which is bishop to c3, seemingly attacking the queen and protecting the knight indirectly. But the problem is that after a trade of queens, queen takes queen, rook takes queen, you actually have knight to c2. And it seems like this knight can't escape anywhere, but then there's this move, b4. So my whole thing about how, I've established this initiative, I take space in the center, my pieces are active, and there's a loose knight, I need to punish that some way, has been refuted, because now my bishop's under attack, but if I take the knight, my bishop will be taken, and my knight here is under attack, because this bishop will be gone. So I cannot do this, is what I concluded. But then I asked, okay, bishop c3 doesn't work after the queen takes the pawn. What about this intermezzo move, knight to f3, retreating the knight and attacking the queen? And now the queen struggles to go anywhere because the black queen is responsible for protecting the knight. That's what they accomplished with the capture. And it seemed like they were winning a pawn and accomplishing the task of defending the knight. But now this is precarious spot for the queen. It has nowhere to go. If it takes the pawn on e4, grabbing another pawn, there's rook to e1, and then it still needs to protect the knight. So you have queen to g4, but then h3, and there's no more squares to go to keep protecting this, and the knight is lost. So the pawn capture is not possible. But the move here that at least gets some compensation for the knight, which is going to be lost after queen to d4, is queen takes b2, because after rook b1, the queen takes another pawn, and then there's a capture here, and in the end, I win the knight as white, but black has 3 pawns. They're able to advance potentially down the queen side, and queen. But my advantage here is I'm able to freeze a little bit of the queen side structure, but my pieces are active and I'm ready to play e5 move the knight, and get my bishop in the game. So I'm really, it's not just that I'm up a piece, but I think I would be able to get all of them involved and potentially still hold my initiative despite these three connected pawns being able to roll down together. And the fact that this queen is all the way in my camp, I can go and harass it potentially to try and get it out. And there's maybe potential for it to be trapped. Like it can't go to d5 because of the pawn. It can't go to c4 because of the knight. It can't really go to any square right now except a4. But even then, I double the pawns, and that completely neutralizes any compensation that black may have for the lost knight. So there's really no good spot for the queen to go, and I think if I get an extra move, I would play rook b2, or actually rook a1, and this queen has nowhere to go except b2. Well, actually no, the bishop would take, but I would prepare some type of attacking move by first maybe e5 and then rook a1. But obviously it's my opponent's turn, and what my opponent could probably do here is something like c5, trying to distract the bishop and protecting the rook here, which is by the way under attack, and then taking the knight in advance. But maybe I would play something like e5 and then try and do the threat against the queen there, where after it takes rook a1 here, queen b2, and then this pawn is here, I would take. And maybe even if something like this, the pawns are doubled here, and I am able to freeze the a pawn here, which is very important. And I could play something like knight here to attack the rook. And then something like this, where I could really gain an initiative and have active pieces despite the fact that I don't have a lot of pawns. So I felt that I was still better there, and I was willing to go for that variation. But my opponent doesn't play the queen takes pawn variation. Instead, in response to the knight being attacked, this knight is here, this knight is here. There's just a very simple move here that I already forgot. But they play the move bishop takes, just completely ignoring this. And I realized that this was actually just like an okay variation for black to go through. But I cannot take this bishop here because I don't want to double. And again, there's this knight to d3 move, and now black gets a little bit active, and my pawn is doubled. So instead, I go for the knight. I take their knight in response to them taking my knight. Queen takes d4 is no longer possible because of the attack on the rook. So black must respond to that threat. Black plays bishop to d6, offering a trade. Now, I don't want to just take the bishop here and fix the pawn structure for black. But I was thinking of a variation where if you take e5, and then my opponent plays d5, this light square bishop is locked in forever. I do have a strategic advantage. But again, what was I playing for in the Catalan? I was playing, in this whole variation, I was playing for the fact that I would have a more active center than they do, which is not possible if that center is locked, mimicking a kind of French-like structure. And I'm only really better because they're passive, but not because I have anything, any like type of like real activity, because that bishop would be blocked in by the d5 pawn. Maybe I could relocate it here, but then it would become more positional when I'm really looking for a little bit more activity here. So I don't want to take. Instead, I play queen to d2 to say that actually I want you to take, I'll recapture, and c5 is no longer possible, and you have a bad c-pawn that I can attack. I can continue to play e5 and make my bishop active. And this I felt was better, but my opponent continues to keep the tension with queen e7. I wasn't sure. There's a move I feel that I already feel that I have a strong position here with the fact that all my pieces are active. I've connected my rooks. the pawn structure has been frozen and the queen side like hasn't been developed yet for black. I really felt they could have played something like e5, where tactically taking here doesn't work because then taking the bishop, taking the pawn, for example, like this. This is not possible because that would be the queen undefended, so the queen would take and the rook would recapture, avoiding the attack. So I felt something like this would allow black to be able to develop something to like the bishop to g4, and then the knight would be able to come out, and a little bit of the problem. One of the problems for black would be solved. Not all of it. Again, I would still have a space advantage in the center. I would play something like d5, preventing pawn to c6 because of my stronghold on the queen side. It does make my bishop a little weaker, but I can always reroute it. And I do have a strong center. And again, this is a 2 versus 1 with this pawn being born in black's side, or at least center. So I still think I am better. I do have a really good advantage here, but I think this is something black could have done to at least allow some type of development, maybe to g4, and then the knight to d7. Instead, we have queen to e7 saying, okay, I really want you to take so I can recapture and make my pawn structure better, but I still refuse to trade by playing a3, and now, if there's ever a capture here, what I would do is recapture with the pawn because I don't want to trade queens. Usually, trading pieces is better for the person who has less space because they're able to move more freely as a result. But I'm the one with more space. I don't want to trade queens. I want to keep black restricted and not being able to use their pieces. And then that makes, with that being able to be a fact of the game, I'm able to make their pieces a target because they're not able to use it against me and use it for their own like strategies in the game. And I'm ready to play e5 now. So I really think, again, e5 should be played, and I would respond with d5, but e5 is pretty much the only chance for black to save the game here. But instead, what my opponent does is they take the bishop, I take back with the pawn, and then they play rook to a7, which does not deal with what I'm doing. And now it may seem like it's like, oh, it's a huge blunder or something, but now I can play e5, and my bishop really pierces the diagonal here in coordination with my knight that is protected by the pawn, and there's an open a file, an open c file for me to attack through. I am borderline winning at this point. I'm not up any material, but all of my pieces are working together right now, and my pieces, everything is coordinated beautifully. It's very difficult for my opponent to do anything, and I'm going to crash through. So rook to a7, e5, c6, which I really don't understand, but you will see like at least why my opponent played it in terms of the proximate reasons for this move. I play rook f c1 to target the pawn, rook here, and I guess my opponent here is going for a hunker down and defend everything strategy and don't let the opponent crash through. Rook here, I play rook to c5. We have bishop to d7 to protect it. We have rook here, and again, I'm just loading up on the c-pawn and getting my pieces really active. Everything here is working beautifully for me. Rook here. Then I play h4. Now I'm done improving on the queen side. There's no pawn moves I can make really because all the pawns are kind of locked. But I can sit and wait and potentially improve on the king side on other parts of the board because my opponent just can't do anything here. So I can just wait and even maybe launch some type of king side attack and improve on the king side with maybe bishop to e4, maybe even a potential rook lift with rook to f3 or g4 and rook to h3 or g3, which was something I had in mind. So even if I move this rook away, like this they're completely frozen here, like they can't do anything. So I play h4, and also gives lift for my king in any case. Bishop t8, e8. Really not an improving move because knight d7 is not a threat, because then I just take the pawn. There's bishop to e8, and then now rook to c3, potential rook lift, and then queen to c1 to maybe even back up the file further to attack this pawn. And if you don't see, these are two rooks right here. You can look at if you're unsure about like what are the pieces there, you can at least look at the squares and also see that there's a knight here. I'll probably just hold them out like this so the curve is clear. Rook to c3, and then my opponent makes a fatal mistake, which, I mean, I'm already winning, but this just results in me winning material. Knight to c7, just undefending the pawn. They probably believe they had some tactic with queen takes b4, but after rook takes, and rook takes, which is what was played in the game, I think my opponent was thinking here, rook here, and then, oh no, I didn't play rook takes first. I played knight takes first. There we go. Knight d7. Rook takes. Oh yes, I did play knight takes because I'm attacking the queen, and I had a tactic here. You can't take here because I'm attacking the queen, and your only move is queen f8 because every other square is taken. And then I would have check, sacrifice my knight, and win the exchange because I'm ganging up on the rook here. So my opponent has no choice. They take the knight. I take here. They go here, and I play rook c8. And now there's a tactic here that is possible that didn't happen if there's a capture. I'm already winning with like the space advantage and the material, but there's really I think it was actually before the capture here. There's really like a bad move to make where you may actually take the pawn with the queen here, thinking, okay, maybe let's get the queen a little bit active and pin the rook to the queen. And this may actually like free up the position with like after trade, king f8, knight to b6, and so forth. Like maybe just keep on the dark squares. But I can actually just take knight takes b8, and I can still play rook to c8, sacrificing my queen, because if queen takes, there's rook takes e8 mate. And so that would actually be a blunder, and so black would have no choice but to retreat to defend, and I would take the knight, or I could actually even just play queen to g5 to force a queen trade, and then still try and threaten checkmate. But yeah, I'm just completely winning here. So what my opponent does, I played rook to c8. I played rook to c8, rook takes, then knight to b6. And I have a tactic here that I didn't play until a later move. I played rook here. But I actually could have played queen to g5 right away. I played this on the next turn, but with queen to g5, actually no, it doesn't work. Oh no, it does work. With queen to g5, you're trying to get the queen to be distracted from the defense of the bishop. So with something like queen d7, you'd play rook here to attack the queen, and the bishop covers c6, and so the defense of the bishop is no longer plausible. The queen would have to sacrifice, and I'm very clearly winning. But in the game, what I played is rook to b8, there was knight to d4, and then queen to g5. and then my opponent played f6, thinking they're able to stop it, but I can actually take. And if the queen takes here, like this, then um, actually after queen takes, I can take the bishop, and I just win a piece. I'm already up in exchange, but here it's just further nail in the coffin here, where I was already winning before, but this is just speeding up the process. So my opponent plays f6. I take the pawn, queen f7, and now it's forced mate. If you can find it, you can just pause it right now, but I'm going to say it now. There is rook takes e8, check. Queen takes e8, and then queen takes g7, checkmate, which is how the game ended. And so, what my thoughts were after the game is, I feel like there was a way to take advantage of what I had in the opening, like in the middle game, to take advantage of what I had in the opening a little bit earlier, but I don't know how exactly. Like, I feel like I played fine. I don't know if, like, maybe the engine will say bishop d2 is bad, but I felt like bishop d2 was okay. And the way I still maintain the pressure, not just giving into a trade just because it may lead to slightly better, like, oh, bishop is inactive. I was able to realize, like, I already had other advantages in the position that I didn't need to forfeit with that trade on bishop to d6. And I feel like this was a short game, so it's not going to be something that it's going to, like, be, like, super, super informative for future games, because I just think my opponent even told me afterwards, like, they were unfamiliar with the knight a3, what to do in response to that. And the best move is to just capture the knight and induce double pawns. So I was lucky enough to be able to play someone who wasn't prepared for my line. They didn't remember what to play. But what happens when someone is prepared? And bishop takes is fine. Like, there's something to play for both white and black. I need to be prepared for that. So I was lucky to have my opponent play a6 and give me activity with my knights and the pawns in the center. And when that pawn to b5, knight e5 happened, I was considering knight e3, but I played the more active move, with my knight to knight to a5. When it was something like this, I could have played back, but actually knight to a5 was the better move and more active move, and I felt that I was able to put more pressure and dominate the squares in the position, which is something that I really like to play like this, where you're active, you're controlling squares in the opponent's camp, and not like just directly winning a pawn, but being able to just completely remove their ability to play the game. And that's what I like about the Catalan. Really puts a good amount of pressure on the opponent, and I feel it's the best way to play chess. But I know I don't need to, like, overblow this game. It wasn't that significant of a game. It was a 60+0 time control in not even a fully quiet room. Like, there was noise. This was part of, like, a chess club meeting. So I have to make sure that I continue revising my opening preparation. I actually have a chess tournament coming up in 2 weeks. It's the Royal City Masters in Guelph, Ontario, and I'll be playing in that. And I'll probably be going over my games either the night of or after the tournament, where I'll be analyzing all my games. But it is going to be a long tournament, 9 rounds of 90+30 over 6 days. I hope to do well and to be able to score at least positively with if I get at least 5 out of 9, that would be great, because it's a very long tournament, and scoring over 50% is a really good achievement in such tournaments. Again, this was a 26 move game. I really need to make sure that I revise all of the variations that are possible, what my opponent can do, and what I should play as black. But yeah, I was satisfied with this game because I don't feel like I made any mistake. But I could have capitalized on that tactic earlier. But, that's that. I was on track to win the game regardless. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy this, and I will be uploading shorter versions of this in the future, hopefully. I'll be mindful of how much I talk, how much I ramble on, maybe about too many points in the game, where I'll just focus on maybe fewer, 4 or 5 moments, and really hammer in on those points. And this was a 26 move game. When the games get longer, I'll probably have to cut down on how much I talk. But again, I really appreciate you listening on my analysis and commentary of my own game. And I hope you have a great day and have fun playing chess. Thank you. Bye bye.